Introduction. A soft whisper on paper. There is something quietly magical about a letter. Not the hurried kind, not the scribbled note tossed on a desk or the printed bill in the mail, but the slower kind. The kind that starts with a gentle breath, an empty sheet, and a flickering thought of someone far away. The kind written with care, as if each stroke of ink might echo across distance and time. Love letters. They are delicate things, and yet somehow enduring. They belong not just to the lovers who write them, but to the dusty drawers, forgotten boxes, and faded ribbons that hold them long after the hands that wrote them have stilled. They have traveled across deserts, over oceans, and through wars. Folded and unfolded. Read and reread. Slept beneath pillows. Pressed to lips. Kept close to hearts. Before emails. Before texting. Before typing. There was the slow art of love written by hand. This is a sleepy journey through that quiet tradition. A long meandering walk through centuries of whispered longing, heartfelt promises, shy confessions, and hopeful declarations, all sealed in paper and wax. We will drift together from the ancient world to the digital age, gently brushing the corners of parchment and passion. There will be no drama here. No grand declarations, no tragedies. Just the soft hum of affection, the kind that lingers gently in a line of poetry or a closing signature. The kind that waits patiently in a folded page. The kind that never hurries. So let the world fall away. Let your breathing slow. And imagine, just for a little while, that you are sitting by candlelight with a pen in your hand. Or perhaps finding a letter addressed to you in elegant script, the seal unbroken, waiting to be opened. Its contents not urgent, but warm. This is the story of love, told quietly, on paper. Scratched into clay, love notes in the ancient world. Long before ink flowed from quills and seals were pressed into warm wax, before parchment crinkled softly under careful hands, there was clay. Simple earth, shaped by water and patience. Soft when wet, hard when baked. And on its surface, the earliest love letters may have been written. Not with flourishes or flowery paper, but with a stylus and quiet intent. We begin in ancient Mesopotamia, a cradle of civilization nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where scribes pressed wedge-shaped characters into tablets of wet clay using a slender reed. Cuneiform, they called it. Though much of what survives tells us of trade, taxes, and temple offerings, buried among those lines of careful marks are other words. Softer words. There are fragments of longing, gentle pledges, even poems. One such fragment, dating to around 2000 BCE, comes from Sumer, a bride addressing her beloved. Her words, now translated, are simple and sweet. Bridegroom, dear to my heart, goodly is your beauty, honey sweet. It is not flowery. It is not formal, but it is tender, and it is real. Imagine her, sitting quietly, tablet on her lap, the stylus in her fingers. Perhaps she smiled to herself. Perhaps she paused now and then to think of the shape of his face or the sound of his voice. Perhaps she never meant for anyone else to read it. And yet, thousands of years later, we still can. The clay has outlasted the hearts that beat behind it. Not far away, in ancient Babylon, another tablet was found. On it were etched the words of a lover, a man this time. He wrote to his beloved about dreams, about yearning, and about the stars. The language is restrained, as Babylonian writing often was, but there is something underneath. A hush. A hope. It's easy to forget how ancient these feelings are. We think of love as new, spontaneous, modern. But long before there were envelopes or stamps, there were hands reaching out across distance through words, even if those words had to be baked into bricks. In ancient Egypt, the material changed. Their love letters began to appear on something lighter, papyrus, made from the reeds of the Nile. It was smoother than clay, easier to fold, to carry, to keep beneath a pillow. Egyptian love poetry, often exchanged between lovers or written to honor affection, reads today with surprising sweetness. One verse, likely from a woman to her beloved, says, "My heart thought of my love for you. I am yours like the garden planted with flowers." It is gentle, soft, familiar, even now. These weren't letters in the way we understand them, not always addressed or signed. But they carried the spirit of what a love letter is. A quiet communication. A murmur between souls. In the ancient world, to write was to labor. Whether on clay, stone, or papyrus, it took time, thought, and patience. Love letters were not written quickly. They were not dashed off in haste or sent with a swipe. They were instead carved slowly into memory. Sometimes these letters were offerings, written to deities on behalf of one's beloved. Sometimes they were songs, meant to be sung quietly under moonlight. Sometimes they were simply marks made to ease a lonely heart. Even kings and queens were not immune. There are letters from Hittite queens to Egyptian pharaohs, requesting marriage alliances. Formal, yes, but often tinged with personal words, carefully chosen. Words that fluttered across borders. Words that survived crumbling palaces and shifting sands. And so, in clay and reed, in sun-baked script and soft-spoken verse, the earliest love letters were born. They did not need fancy paper. They did not need perfume or lace. What they carried was something much simpler: the need to connect, to remember, to say, in one form or another, "I am thinking of you." In the next chapter, we'll walk gently along the banks of the Nile and the Aegean, where love letters began to bloom with more flourish, with myth, with metaphor, and with the lingering warmth of early civilization. But for now, imagine holding a small clay tablet in your hand. Feel its weight. Trace the markings with your thumb. Let the stillness of those ancient words calm your breathing. Because love has always found a way to be written, even in stone. Papyrus and passion, letters in Egypt and Greece. As the ancient world stretched and settled into the rhythms of civilization, the art of love, and the writing of it, grew richer, softer, and more lyrical. We drift now to Egypt again, this time more deeply, into the land of soft linen, lotus blossoms, and the Nile's quiet song. A place where hearts beat in harmony with the sun, and affection found its voice on pressed sheets of papyrus. Papyrus, smooth, light, and delicate. A material made from the river's reeds, sliced thin, soaked, and pressed until it became something more than a plant. It became a medium for memory, for poems, for promises, for passion. In the Egyptian New Kingdom, around 1300 BCE, love poetry flourished. Though not always formatted as personal letters, these were expressions of longing, written in the first person, often directed to a beloved. They were meant to be read privately, whispered, or perhaps even sung. A young woman, in one poem, speaks of walking past her lover's house. "I passed by his door. My heart was filled with desire. I couldn't stop my feet." There is a gentle bashfulness in it, a kind of dreamlike confession. She says she's trying not to appear too eager, but her words reveal her longing. It's easy to hear the smile behind the verse. Imagine the papyrus in her hand, folded carefully, held close to her chest before being slipped away to its reader. Egyptian poetry often compared the beloved to nature, to flowers, to birds, to the coolness of shade in the heat of the day. These were metaphors chosen not for drama, but for comfort, for closeness, for the sense that love was not loud, but lived quietly in the background of all things. And then, across the sea, we arrive in ancient Greece. Here, too, love letters began to take shape, in myths, in plays, and in real life. The Greeks had many words for love: eros for passion, philia for friendship, agape for spiritual affection. Their letters, like their language, were layered. While fewer love letters survive in physical form from classical Greece, their literature is rich with examples of emotional correspondence, imagined or inspired, passed between lovers, separated by war, distance, or duty. In Plato's Phaedrus, there is talk of how the written word allows thoughts to be preserved, sent like messengers. Even the gods, it seems, valued love in writing. One of the earliest known women to write romantic poetry in her own voice was Sappho, the poet of Lesbos, who lived around 600 BCE. Her verses, though fragmented by time, are rich with personal affection. From her pen came lines like, "You came, and I was longing for you. You cooled my heart that burned with desire." Though not addressed as formal letters, Sappho's poems feel like letters. Direct, intimate, carried across time like secrets meant only for one pair of eyes. Each one a paper-thin window into the soul of someone in love. Her writing, like a breeze over the sea, continues to stir hearts, thousands of years later. In Hellenistic Egypt, a blend of Greek and Egyptian culture, love letters became more recognizable in structure. Personal letters from ordinary people have been uncovered, preserved in the dry sands of Oxyrhynchus. Some are clumsy, others poetic. All are deeply human. One man wrote simply to his wife, "If you delay, he shall die. You know how we love you. You know how we way." There are no flourishes, just truth. There is something profoundly comforting about how little the essence of love has changed. Whether scratched into clay, painted on papyrus, or pressed into a scroll, people still waited. People still worried. People still whispered affection into pages that might never be read aloud. Even in myth, the Greeks imagined letters full of longing. In Ovid's Heroids, mythical women like Penelope, Dido, and Ariadne wrote imagined letters to their absent lovers, lamenting, remembering, hoping.
These fictional letters echo à deeper truths. When the vat is full, the hand must to write.
And so, as the world became more connected, and materials more refined, the love letter evolved, but never changed entirely. It remained what it had always been, a message wrapped in softness, meant for one heart alone. As the ink dried on ancient papyrus and Greek parchment, another age waited quietly beyond, where love letters would be gilded with poetry, folded with lace, and sealed with fragrant wax. But that comes later. For now, let us rest here by the quiet rivers of the past, where reed pens once danced, and longing was spoken through simple lines. Sleep, if you like, with the thought that somewhere in time, someone once wrote something beautiful, for someone else, who perhaps never even read it. But still, it was written. And it still lingers.
Sealed with empire, roman loves and lettering.
By the time the Roman Empire stretched across continents, love letters had begun to take on more familiar shapes, folded, sealed, and sent with care. It was a world of roads and legions, of marble columns and organized systems. A place where power was written in law, and sometimes where love was written in ink. The Romans were lovers of words. They wrote with purpose, with precision, and often with passion. They composed letters about state matters, property, and family, but also about longing, about absence, about desire. To write was to connect, and even the mighty, beneath their togas and titles, could not escape the pull of the pen. Among the preserved fragments of Roman writing, we find moments of quiet affection, whispers of the heart, scratched onto wax tablets, painted onto papyrus, or etched into pottery shards. Some are personal letters between spouses. Others are verses by poets. But all in their own way are echoes of love. One famous poet of the Augustan age was Ovid, known for his playful, clever, and romantic verses. His work Amores offers glimpses into the flirtations and heartbreaks of Roman love. Ovid writes with a wink, but sometimes his words soften. He once wrote, "Let others sing of wars and arms, I sing of love." Through Ovid's eyes, love was not just an emotion, but a story, a performance, a dance in writing. His poetry may not always have been written as letters, but it often felt like one side of a private conversation, rich with yearning, wit, and charm. And beyond the poets, there were everyday Romans. In the ruins of Vindolanda, a Roman fort near Hadrian's Wall in what is now northern England, archaeologists uncovered thin wooden tablets, messages exchanged between soldiers, their families, and friends. Among them was a simple invitation from a Roman woman named Claudia Severa to another woman, inviting her to a birthday celebration. She ends the letter with, "I shall expect you, sister. Farewell, my dearest soul." It may not sound like a love letter, but its tone is unmistakably tender, affectionate, familiar, and in its warmth, we find the fingerprints of friendship and possibly more, a closeness that transcended time, preserved in ink. Roman couples, separated by war or duty, often wrote to each other. A soldier posted far from home might send a message to his wife or sweetheart. Some used professional scribes to help them put emotion into words. Others wrote for themselves, using whatever materials they had. One husband, writing to his wife during a military campaign, says,
Ikis zoondet ilontuold.
"My soul is not with me, for it dwells in your body." These are not the words of an emperor or senator, but an ordinary man, separated from love by distance, and trying to bridge that gap with ink. The Romans also developed a more formal system of letter delivery, through slaves, couriers, and public messengers. Some love letters were wrapped, tied with string, and sealed with wax bearing a signet ring impression. The seal was both protection and intimacy, a small personal mark that said, "This is from me to you." And so, love passed through gates and across borders, bearing the seal of a heart sent far away. For the Roman elite, love letters could also be political. Alliances were proposed with affection folded into strategy. A marriage offer might be written as a plea for unity, but also with words chosen to charm. Behind those words lay ambition, and perhaps sometimes sincere tenderness too. Yet even emperors fell under love's spell. Hadrian, known for his travels and building projects, had a beloved companion named Antinous. While few letters between them survive, Hadrian's grief after Antinous' death was so deep, he named cities and stars after him. One wonders what kind of letters they shared, if any, and how they read, now long lost to time. The physical remnants of Roman love letters may be few.
Papyrus de quai.
Wax melts. Wood crumbles. But the sentiments survive in their poetry, in their inscriptions, and in the quiet phrases passed down through scholars and scribes. To write a love letter in Rome was to place your heart in the hands of fate. It might be intercepted. It might be delayed. It might never reach its intended reader. And yet they wrote. Because to not write, to remain silent, was a kind of heartbreak all its own. In the next chapter, we'll cross into the medieval world, where love letters became part of chivalry and courtly devotion, exchanged in secret, hidden in pockets, and written in borrowed Latin or rhyming verse. But here, in marble villas and windswept garrisons, the Romans taught the world that love could be sealed, not just in wax, but in words.
Let your thoughts drift now, like a letter rolling slowly along a Roman road. Dusty, unhurried, and full of hope.
Scribes and scrolls, courting in medieval courts. As the Roman world faded into memory, and the early medieval centuries rose with towers, cloisters, and castles, love letters took on new forms, quieter, more veiled, and often more secret. The medieval world was one of hierarchy and silence, where marriages were arranged, and affections were often hidden behind duty. And yet, the human heart still reached for parchment and pen, still longed to say, I miss you.
I wait for you. I belong to you.
Letters became sacred, folded, sealed, and delivered in secret, passed between castle servants, hidden inside books of prayers, read by candlelight and kissed when no one was watching. We begin with the courtly tradition, a system of noble affection born in the high halls of France and flowing through Europe like a quiet song. Here, love was not always consummated, but cherished from afar. The beloved was often unattainable, a lady of high station, admired by a knight, a poet, a troubadour. To love was to wait and to write. Troubadours and court poets composed lyrics that danced between verse and letter.
One might to write.
To my lady, who knows not how she wounds me, I send these lines like a sigh carried on wind. These songs were often shared aloud, but many were also copied, delivered, or exchanged. Some were personal. Some were hopeful fiction. But all of them carried the quiet ache of longing, dressed in formal language and gentle metaphor. The medieval letter of love was not always direct. It might begin with a Latin salutation, followed by a formal praise of the recipient's virtues, and then slowly reveal its emotion.
A young scribe might to write.
To the most radiant among women, whose beauty causes the stars to blush, I place these humble words, trembling as I do. The words are clothed in honor. But beneath that velvet is affection. One of the most poignant collections of medieval love letters comes from a real story, that of Heloise and Abelard, two lovers in 12th century France. Heloise was a brilliant scholar.
Abelard, her tutor.
Their love was forbidden and tragic. But their letters, exchanged long after their separation, are filled with philosophical reflection, emotional honesty, and quiet yearning.
Héloïse writes to Abelard.
I would rather be your mistress than the wife of a king. Their correspondence is not filled with metaphor or courtly flattery, but raw intimacy, as if each letter were a piece of their heart, passed across impossible distance. Their story is one of passion, but also of separation.
And the letters?
They are what remain. They remind us that in a time when women were rarely allowed to speak freely, a letter could be a voice.
A secret whisper.
A preserved truth. Elsewhere in Europe, noblewomen kept books of hours, personal prayer books, often containing tiny pressed letters, poems, or verses folded between pages. Love was hidden in these margins, sometimes in code, sometimes in illuminated initials, like secret ink beneath sacred text. For those who couldn't write, letters were sometimes dictated to scribes. Trusted servants might carry them across villages, forests, or battlefields. Sometimes a token was sent with it, a piece of embroidered ribbon, a pressed flower, a lock of hair. These were gestures of faith and of patience. Medieval love was often slow, stretched across distance, obligation, and silence. But the letters made it real. Even if unread for weeks, even if never returned, even if burned. As time moved on, parchment became more accessible, ink more permanent. The format of the letter began to resemble what we know today: a greeting, a body, a closing, a signature. But in the medieval world, the letter was still a sacred object. To write one was to send a piece of your soul. The final lines of many medieval love letters were prayers, not only for love, but for safety, for peace, for time. May God keep you, beloved, until we meet in this life or the next. In the next chapter, we will step into the golden glow of the Renaissance, a world of sonnets, silk, and declarations folded in perfume. But for now, let this castle quiet itself.
Let the scroll rest.
And let your thoughts settle like a feather on parchment, soft and slow, until even words fall asleep. Quills and sonnets, the Renaissance of romantic letters.
Oui, the dawn of the Renaissance came a flowering, of art, of knowledge, and of the hat.
It was a time of discovery, not only of far-off lands and scientific truths, but of the soul itself. And within that tender exploration, the love letter took on new life, ornate, poetic, and deeply personal. Paper, now more common than parchment, fluttered gently in the hands of poets, courtiers, and painters. Quills dipped in ink traced words not only of devotion but of longing, admiration, and reflection. Letters became more than messages, they became art. And love became a subject worthy of sonnets. In Italy, where the Renaissance bloomed brightest, the poet Petrarch gave the world a model of love immortalized in verse. His sonnets to Laura, whom he loved from afar, were deeply emotional, yet respectful, idealized, and restrained.
I find no peace, and all my war is done. I fear and hope, I burn and freeze like ice.
His poems were not addressed as direct letters, yet they held the shape of them. Each one a message sealed in rhyme. Each one a sigh folded into 14 lines. Petrarch's example would inspire generations of lovers and letter writers to follow. Elsewhere in Europe, noble courts shimmered with flirtation. Love letters became an expected part of courtship. Men and women exchanged them with delicate formality, often quoting classical poets or scriptures. A letter might begin with a line from Virgil and end with a pressed kiss. It was during this time that the art of the love letter evolved into something almost theatrical. Flourishes in penmanship, elaborate language, and dramatic declarations became common. In England, love was written into plays and poetry, none more famously than by William Shakespeare. His sonnets are among the most famous expressions of affection ever written. Each one a carefully crafted letter in verse, full of praise, passion, and sometimes pain. In Sonnet 18, he writes, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate." Though not meant as letters in the traditional sense, these verses were often shared as if they were, passed between lovers, recited in quiet gardens, and folded into secret drawers. Love letters in this era were sometimes shared publicly, as a form of romantic display. But often, the most sincere ones remained hidden, tied with ribbons, locked in chests, or kept under pillows. The Renaissance also gave rise to personal letter collections, entire volumes of correspondence preserved by families, lovers, and friends. These compilations, often beautifully bound, were kept not for duty, but for remembrance. In them, we find love letters filled with metaphor, carefully penned compliments, and dramatic yearning, but also soft lines of ordinary emotion. One woman wrote to her husband, away on duty.
I kissed the paper so you might feel it when you touch this.
That gesture, simple as it is, lingers across centuries. Wax seals became more elaborate during this time. Families had signet rings engraved with initials or symbols. Lovers sometimes created private seals, tiny hearts, birds, or flowers, so the recipient knew immediately who the letter came from, even before it was opened. The scent of a letter also mattered. Paper might be perfumed with rosewater or lavender. It wasn't uncommon for a letter to be folded with dried petals inside, so the fragrance would carry a quiet message of affection. For many, love letters during the Renaissance were also acts of longing, sent across great distances. As exploration grew and trade expanded, lovers were often separated for weeks, months, or more. A letter, then, was not just a message, it was a moment of presence. To open one was to feel that the other person had returned, even if just for the space of a few lines. Love letters became common even among those not of noble birth. Merchants, artists, students, and scholars. Many wrote to lovers in ink-stained hands, sometimes imperfectly, but always earnestly. One such letter, written by a stonemason to his betrothed, simply read, "I have laid each stone this week with thoughts of you. My hands are tired, but my heart is light, for I know you wait." There is no poetry there. But perhaps, that's what makes it poetry. As the Renaissance faded into the early modern age, the tradition of letter writing only grew, shaped by printing presses, postal systems, and new ideas of romance. But this chapter, this golden age of ink and idealism, left behind something precious. The love letter not just as a confession, but as a celebration. A painting in words. Next, we will enter the age of powdered wigs and silk ribbons, where love was folded into carefully scripted lines and sealed with fragrant wax. But for now, let your breathing slow, and let the sonnet in your mind unfold gently, like a letter left by a candle. Waiting. Wax seals and silk ribbons. Love in the Georgian and Regency era. As the 18th century unfolded with the rustle of silk gowns and the tick of long-case clocks, the love letter became more refined, more ritualized, and ever more central to the art of courtship. The Georgian and Regency eras were times of structured elegance, of powdered wigs and satin slippers, drawing rooms and candlelit suppers. Love, though often filtered through the lens of propriety, still found a way to express itself, most often through paper and pen. For those in the upper classes, letter writing was not only a form of expression, it was a delicate skill, an expected part of a well-rounded education. Young ladies were taught to write with care, not only in grammar but in grace. The shape of each word mattered, the slope of each loop, the spacing between lines. Ink-stained fingertips were a sign of gentle refinement. Romantic feelings, however, were rarely shouted aloud. In a society that prized restraint and etiquette, love letters often danced around the subject, using flowery metaphor, poetry, or references to novels and plays to say what one could not say outright. To write, "I think of you constantly," might instead be written, "Your absence lingers like the final note of a favorite tune." In England, the Regency era, circa 1811 to 1820, shimmered with quiet emotional tension. Writers like Jane Austen captured this nuance perfectly. Her novels filled with unspoken glances, restrained affection, and letters that carried the true weight of emotion. In Pride and Prejudice, it is not a proposal or a speech that turns hearts, but a letter. Mr. Darcy's handwritten message becomes the hinge upon which the entire story turns. Austen herself was a letter writer, and her surviving correspondence with friends and family shows wit, warmth, and a deep sensitivity to language. Though most of her personal love letters are lost, if they existed at all, her novels teach us what letters meant in her time. Love letters in the Georgian and Regency eras often included tokens, small gifts of sentiment, a pressed flower, a ribbon once worn, a miniature painting, a ring. These items were folded gently into the parchment and tied with silk threads or tucked beneath the seal. Seals themselves had grown more elaborate. Not only did noble families use heraldic seals, but individuals, especially those in love, began using private designs. A swan, a heart, a crescent moon. Lovers would come to recognize each other's seal as surely as a signature. One popular motif was a pair of doves. Another was a flaming torch, the classical symbol of passion. Scent remained important. Many letters were perfumed with lavender sachets or floral oils. The scent was meant not only to please but to carry memory, the olfactory echo of someone far away. Among soldiers, love letters took on a different tone, tender, longing, and often hurried. The Napoleonic Wars and other military campaigns meant long absences. Letters from the front were sometimes scribbled quickly, smudged with mud or sweat, but treasured more dearly than gold. One such letter, from an officer to his wife, read, "I have not slept, for I keep your name in my mouth like a prayer. Write soon, for your words are my true rations." For the middle and working classes, love letters were less ornate but no less heartfelt. Though education levels varied, many people found ways to write, sometimes asking help from a literate friend or relative. Sentiment mattered more than spelling. Postal systems improved in this era, especially in England and France, making letter delivery more reliable. Still, delays were common, and each letter carried a pulse of anticipation. There were tales of lovers receiving a letter months after it was sent, only to discover the writer had since died or married another. The letter then became a ghost, a sealed moment forever preserved. The Georgian and Regency periods gave us not only beautiful letters, but also a culture of reverence around them. They were not discarded, but saved. Stored in boxes, hidden under mattresses, sewn into clothing linings, or kept in lockets. To receive a love letter was to be granted a glimpse into the soul of another, and to write one was to whisper into time. By the end of this chapter in history, love letters had become a symbol of both romantic idealism and real human longing. They carried the voices of people who loved within the rules of society, yet dreamed of something more. As we drift gently into the 19th century, we step into the age of industry, where love would ride trains, cross oceans, and arrive with stamps and steam. But for now, rest in the stillness of candlelight and cursive, where love whispered behind fans, and fluttered on folded parchment. Love in transit, Victorian letters, trains, and telegraphs. The 19th century rolled in with a cloud of steam and a new kind of urgency. The Victorian era, stretching from 1837 to 1901, was an age of rapid change.
Technologie blossomed.
Cities grew.
Empire expanded.
And even the art of love, once slow and handwritten in candlelit silence, began to stir with the pulse of modern life. But despite all the noise and movement, the love letter did not vanish. It adapted, traveling faster, farther, and more frequently than ever before. The invention of the penny post in 1840, marked by the world's first adhesive postage stamp, the penny black, revolutionized letter writing in Britain. For just 1 penny, Anyone could send a letter anywhere in the country. This meant that, for the first time, love letters could pass freely across class lines. A maid could write to her sweetheart in another town. A factory worker could court a girl he met at a holiday fair. Middle-class lovers could write not just occasionally, but regularly, even daily. And write they did. Victorian letter writing became a near-daily habit for many. Lovers exchanged notes filled with flowery language, careful sentiment, and delicate etiquette. The postman became a figure of great emotional weight, a bringer of both joy and sorrow. For the upper classes, letter writing remained an art. Whole manuals were published, offering advice on tone, phrasing, and appropriate levels of emotion. A typical courtship letter might begin, "My dearest Miss Eliza, permit me the honor of addressing you once more with sincerest admiration." Yet beneath the formalities, emotion still stirred, often more deeply than before. Victorian values prized restraint and propriety, but this made love letters even more powerful. A slight shift in tone, a word like longing or devoted, might carry immense weight. In many households, these letters were read and reread by lamplight, pressed to lips, folded carefully into drawers, or hidden under pillows. Technology didn't stop with the post. By the 1850s, the telegraph had arrived, a marvel of wires and clicks that could transmit messages in mere minutes across cities or continents. Though not ideal for long romantic letters, telegrams became part of courtship too, especially in moments of urgency.
À soudaine déclaration.
A rushed farewell.
À coded message meant on lit fortu. One telegram read. Délai de parture.
Cannot bear parting.
Iur eternali.
It was short. It was charged. And it raced along wires faster than a horse ever could. Still, for matters of the heart, most lovers preferred the handwritten letter. It was slower, yes, but more intimate. The curl of a pen, the pressure of the hand, the faint scent of the paper, these were things no wire could send. Letters traveled by train now, tucked into mailbags aboard the Royal Mail coaches that thundered down iron tracks. Special traveling post offices even sorted letters mid-journey, cutting delivery times dramatically. This speed meant love letters became more like conversations than confessions. A couple might write back and forth in near real time. The distance between them seemed to shrink, a romantic echo of the modern text message, but far more tangible. Newspaper columns occasionally published anonymous love letters, sometimes out of scandal, sometimes out of curiosity. Readers devoured them. These printed letters gave a glimpse into others' private lives, their tenderness, their longing, their loss. And yet, not all letters reached their destination. Some were lost in war, crumpled in the mud of foreign fields. Others were returned unopened. Some were delayed by years. There are stories of love letters arriving decades later, yellowed fragile, long after the sender and receiver had passed. These ghostly messages speak to the persistence of the written word.
A love letter, unsurwritten, does not vanish.
It waits. It holds its breath. It endures. By the end of the Victorian era, love letters had become more than just private expressions. They were artifacts of culture, preserved in ribbon-tied bundles, stored in attics, discovered in old trunks. Each one a soft echo of a heart once open. As the 20th century approached, new inventions loomed on the horizon.
Téléphone.
Typewriters.
Airplane.
But even as the world changed, the love letter endured, carried not just by trains and wires, but by hope.
Because no matter the speed of life.
Sometimes, the heart still needs to take its time.
Wordatoire, Letters of Longines the 20th century.
The 20th century opened with promise and invention, but it was also a century of separation.
2 world wars.
Countless smaller conflicts.
Borders shifting like tide.
And in the midst of it all, people trying to stay connected, trying to hold on to love, across vast oceans and uncertain tomorrows. The love letter, once a gentle ritual of courtship, became something more urgent, a lifeline, a comfort, a tether between two hearts kept apart by war. In the early days of the First World War, young men went off to the front with letters tucked into their pockets, words from sweethearts, wives, and mothers. And they wrote back whenever they could. These letters were often smudged with dirt, damp from weather, written on whatever paper was available, even the backs of ration cards or hymn sheets. Yet they carried tenderness, longing, and quiet courage. A single line might read, "I think of you when the wind blows through the wheat, as it did when we walked together." Or simply, "Your photograph is in my coat. I look at it before sleep." Letters in wartime were more than words. They were presents. A way of reaching across fear, mud, and miles to say, "I am still here.
You are not alone."
In some cases, lovers who had barely spoken before the war became emotionally bound through letters. Strangers turned soulmates by ink and paper. During World War II, letter writing reached staggering volumes. The U.S. military delivered over 2 billion pieces of mail in 1945 alone. Troops wrote home from ships, airfields, and jungle outposts. Civilians wrote daily, anxiously awaiting replies. The invention of V-mail, or Victory Mail, helped letters travel faster and lighter. Messages were written on special forms, photographed, shrunk, and shipped as microfilm to conserve space. On arrival, they were printed and delivered like postcards. It was efficient, but still deeply personal. These wartime letters were full of emotion, but rarely dramatic. Love in war was often quiet, a whispered hope, a remembered kiss, a promise to return. Soldiers avoided worrying their loved ones. They might write, "The food is tolerable, and the night's not too cold." Even if they were freezing in a foxhole. And at home, partners often wrote bravely too. "I planted marigolds beside the step. I think you would have liked them." It was this ordinary sweetness, the mention of tea, a song heard on the radio, a neighbor's cat, that made the letters so cherished. They reminded the reader of what was waiting, of what was worth surviving for. These wartime letters were full of emotion, but rarely dramatic. Love in war was often quiet, a whispered hope, a remembered kiss, a promise to return. Soldiers avoided worrying their loved ones. They might write, "The food is tolerable, and the night's not too cold." Even if they were freezing in a foxhole. And at home, partners often wrote bravely too. "I planted marigolds beside the step. I think you would have liked them." It was this ordinary sweetness, the mention of tea, a song heard on the radio, a neighbor's cat, that made the letters so cherished. They reminded the reader of what was waiting, of what was worth surviving for. These wartime letters were full of emotion, but rarely dramatic. Love in war was often quiet, a whispered hope, a remembered kiss, a promise to return. Soldiers avoided worrying their loved ones. They might write, "The food is tolerable, and the night's not too cold." Even if they were freezing in a foxhole. And at home, partners often wrote bravely too. "I planted marigolds beside the step. I think you would have liked them." It was this ordinary sweetness, the mention of tea, a song heard on the radio, a neighbor's cat, that made the letters so cherished. They reminded the reader of what was waiting, of what was worth surviving for. Not all letters arrived, of course. Some were delayed for months. Some were censored, words blacked out by military ink. Some never came at all, and that silence was often more devastating than any news. And then there were the letters that said goodbye. The ones written in case the writer did not return. If you are reading this, I am likely gone. Such letters were rarely mailed unless fate demanded it. They were folded with care, left behind with comrades or commanding officers, sealed with hope and fear. Some were opened decades later, long after the wars had ended. A final gesture, a last touch. Through the pain of war, love letters became more than romantic. They became sacred. They were kept in lockets, hidden in books, or tied in bundles with faded ribbon. Many families still have them, tucked in drawers, in boxes, in memories. Generations later, people read them aloud, and feel the past breathing softly between each line. Even in wartime, love made its way home. Not always in person, but always in words. From typewriters to texts, love letters in the modern age. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the pace of communication quickened. What once took weeks to arrive could now reach a loved one in seconds. Still, despite typewriters clacking, keyboards humming, and phones vibrating with messages, the heart, slow, steady longing, continued its patient rhythm. Love, even in a world of instant connection, still found its way into words. The mid-20th century saw the rise of the typewritten love letter, crisp, neat, and often more private than letters before. Typewriters gave many a new confidence, especially those unsure of their handwriting or spelling. There was something deliberate about each keystroke.
No autocorrect.
No delete. Each line typed with full intent. A young woman might type,
My fin j'ai Monsieur Rand on the subway. I watch for you in stranger face.
or, I've typed this sentence 3 times, trying to say it right. I love you, simply, quietly, and more than yesterday. Typed letters were often folded neatly into envelopes, spritzed with perfume, or pressed with lipstick kisses. Though machine-made in form, they carried all the warmth of their handwritten predecessors. In the 1980s and 1990s, home computers and word processors changed the texture of love letters again. Fonts replaced handwriting, spell check removed hesitations, and printers whirred with modern love. And then, email arrived. The first email love notes were simple, often awkward. Short, direct, sometimes playful. But people adapted. Digital messages, for all their speed, carried the same ancient wish, to be close despite distance. Even with glowing screens, love remained tender. A subject line could still make a heart race. A reply could still make a day brighter. The 2000s brought texts and messaging apps. Suddenly, affection arrived in blips and beeps. Emojis bloomed where adjectives once did. Today, love letters take many forms. A voice memo whispered before sleep. A playlist shared with meaning. A long message saved and reread in quiet moments. Some still write by hand. Others collect screenshots. Some still seal envelopes with care. Others bookmark favorite texts. Whether typed or tapped, printed or posted, love letters still carry the same magic. The magic of pausing to say, "This is how I feel." And in a world that moves faster each year, that pause means even more. A gentle reflection. Why love letters still matter. The world has changed. The way we speak, the tools we use, the speed at which we live, All have shifted, reshaped, and surged forward. And yet, even now, love letters remain. They may look different. A folded paper sealed with wax, a smudged ink-stained corner, a typed email in neat font, or even a whispered message left on a phone. But in each of them, something timeless lingers. A quiet offering of feeling. A piece of a heart, handed over gently. To write a love letter is to stop. To breathe. To think of someone not just in passing, but deeply. Carefully. It is to say, here is what you mean to me, and to mean it in the silence between the words. Love letters are not loud. They do not demand. They wait. They rest in drawers, linger between book pages, hide beneath mattresses or inside envelopes never opened. They are not urgent. They are eternal. Each one is a quiet testament to human hope, to the belief that another person might read these words, and feel the warmth they were written with. In a world overflowing with noise, the love letter remains a whisper. In a world rushing forward, it remains still. In a world flooded with fleeting messages, it says, "This one matters." And for those who write them, it is a way to understand their own hearts, to unfold the feelings that words struggle to hold, to offer vulnerability wrapped in sentences. And for those who receive them, it is a moment to pause, to be seen, to be remembered. So yes, the tools have changed, but the purpose remains. To connect, to comfort, to cherish. Perhaps that is why love letters still matter. Because long after the ink fades, long after the paper yellows or the text thread is lost, the message lives on, quietly, patiently, beautifully. A love letter is more than words. It is a feeling, folded, and that, it seems, will never go out of style.